Welcome to Awdhesh Academy. Our topic for today's essay is Globalization versus Nationalism. Now, this topic appeared in 2009 and it is still relevant. So, let's discuss about this. Now, to draw the layout of the entire essay, we can discuss about first the definitions. Now, these definitions need not be the dictionary definitions, but you may explain it in your own words, that is, what is globalization and what is nationalism. Now, you may also include a brief history of both nationalism and globalization. Then we can discuss about positives and negatives of globalization. And similarly, we can talk about positives and negatives of nationalism. And lastly, we will have a conclusion wherein we will give the solutions for the negatives of both the problem of globalization and nationalism. Now let's start. Let's start with the definitions first. So, what is globalization? It is basically movement, then interaction, interchange of goods, services, people, ideas, etc. So basically, globalization is the movement of goods, services, people, ideas, etc. through interchange and interaction between two or more countries. So this is globalization. Now let's talk about nationalism. Now nationalism is basically an emotional feeling, an emotional attachment towards your country and its interests. Now, you may have your own definition, you may have your own ideology and your own way of expressing your nationalism. Like if you talk about our great leaders, then you may find that there were several ideologies like Gandhi ji, Raja Ram Mohan Roy. All these people stood for social changes as their way of expressing their nationalism. While on the other hand, Mangal Pandey, Bhagat Singh, Jhansi Ki Rani, all these people were more about making some noise, using violence to prove their point and to get noticed. On the other hand, Rabindranath Tagore, Aurobindo Ghosh, all these people stood up with their literary and art works to express their nationalism. While there were Satyendranath Bose, C.V. Raman, who took care of the Science and Technology department for their nationalism. So everyone has their own definition and own ideologies to contribute to the national interest and the way to love their own country. So this is about the basic definitions of globalization and nationalism. Now after the basic definitions, now let's talk about history. Now let's take a timeline of past and present for globalization first. Now, earlier, globalization was basically traveling. When there used to be great travelers like Vasco da Gama, Columbus, they discovered new countries, they discovered sea routes to the new countries, and that's how scientific and religious ideas were circulated during the older times. There were no books and people communicated their ideas through traveling. When some travelers came, suppose in India, they learned something from here and went back to communicate that idea in their own country. So that's how ideas, peoples and good used to travel, used to move around different parts of the world through the sea routes. And later we had trade routes. Now in the present context, With the improvements in science, technology, communication and transportation systems, we have internet now, the mobile rates, the data charges are all very less now. We can travel to any part of the world, we can communicate to any part of the world with this technology. Now, the world politics now revolves around its economy. We have oil, nuclear deals, medicines, then education, work, all these are governed by globalization. People move to different places to work, people move to different places to seek education and to study. All these things are the factors which govern the globalized world today. Now moving on, let's talk about the positives of globalization. Now with globalization, we are importing a lot of goods which we earlier had no access of. Like now, about 47% of our power consumption is imported. Now, we are making important imports in the context of oil, then medical instruments, then military, defense. These are our major imports. Plus, we have had FDIs and MNCs are coming in the market and they are giving rise to new employment opportunities in the youth. Now also, another important aspect of globalization is there are multiple players in the market now. And when there are multiple players, there is competition. And competition gives rise to innovation. So we have different and people, the companies innovate to produce new products so as to appease their consumers. Now since there is competition among the companies, they are also keeping the prices lower than expected because now nobody has a monopoly and consumers will go towards them who has the lower price. So consumers are the most benefited people in the entire scenario of globalization. Now they have multiple options, now they have lower prices. Like if you talk about mobile, incoming, outgoing rates, then you have data charges, all these have gone down with time because there are multiple players now and the technology has evolved over the time. Also, we have learned through a lot of our imports. Like we have had metros, which earlier we had imported the technology from Japan when we started making metros in Delhi and even in Kolkata. But now since we have imported the technology and we have learned it, now we make our own indigenous metro rails and even we export it to other countries. Like in 2016, we imported a large batch of metros to Australia. So this is one important advantage of globalization. That is, if you don't know something, you seek others' help, you pay them for first instance, and then once you have learned the technology, you can ideate it, you can make your own indigenous products and even export it. Now you can also talk about how globalization helps to diversify your culture. As you may have noticed that how yoga has gained popularity in the foreign countries and how we are having salsa and zumba classes in our own country. Major cities of the world bank on the migrants and immigrants coming from different parts of the world and they add up their own something to the culture of that city and that country and hence help in diversifying the nation. Now when you are talking about exports, you cannot miss out the service sector of India. Service sector of India has evolved recently in the past 2 to 3 decades enormously and service sector is contributing the most to the GDP growth of our nation. And in the service sector, an important part is the IT sector. Now, if you look back in 1970s, we were the ones who opposed the rise of computers and the IT industries in the country. And now we are a major exporter of IT solutions and softwares across the world. If you recall, ISRO in 2016 launched 104 satellites, and out of those 104, 101 were foreign satellites, including that of Google. This was a significant milestone in the history of ISRO and also for India. Now, whenever you are talking about something related to economy like globalization, it's better to use some facts. So now let's discuss about few of them. Before 1991, which was a landmark step in the history of India, so we can discuss about before and after 1991 to discuss about the positives of globalization. So before 1991 till the 80s, we had a stagnated growth rate of about 3.5%, which was also called the Hindu growth rate. Now we are growing at approximately 7%, and we are estimated to grow at about 7.8% in the coming fiscal year. So this is remarkable. Also, China, which was the most growing nation in the world among the major economy, we have outpaced them in 2015, and now we are the most growing nation in the world. So that is a significant achievement. Also, if you look at our foreign reserves, before 1991, they stand about 5.8 to 6 billion, and now we have reached to about 270 billion. So that is a huge jump. Plus our GDP has become 4 times now. Our exports have gone up from about 18 billion to 180 billion. So that's how remarkable and that's how huge the 1991 reforms were for India. Now let's discuss about the negatives of globalization. So the first major disadvantage or negative aspect of globalization is it kills the domestic market. Particularly the small and medium industries which suffer due to the presence of major foreign investors and foreign players in the market. Also, the small retailers are suffering due to the invasion of the market by the foreign major players, particularly in the digital media. Now, next we can talk about brain drain. That is, when educated people from India go and work or study abroad, it's a brain drain because we had invested in them a lot of our energy, we had subsidized education. So all that goes in vain when those talented people go abroad to work. So that is what is called brain drain. Also, our culture is taking a hit because when our culture is getting westernized, people are forgetting their own roots, and that is not a good thing. Also, now when our economies are dependent on foreign players, those foreign players and foreign countries are ruling our country. Now the power of any country relies on the power of its economy. Now with globalization, the bigger economies, the bigger nations are having a say in all the domestic markets, domestic matters of different countries like US, Russia. These are major economies and almost all the world politics is ruled by them and other superpowers. So that is a major disadvantage of globalization. Next negative aspect of globalization can be joblessness. When you import something from a foreign country, you give the opportunity to them and kill the opportunity from your own domestic players. So that gives rise to joblessness. Like even if we are growing at about 7 and 7.5%, but our job creation is only near 3.5%. Now we have discussed about all these things and we are moving to the positives and negatives of nationalism. Now let's start with positives first. Particularly in the economic aspect, nationalism leads to inclusiveness, social welfare, and ensuring equality. You may have reservations, you may have subsidies. All these may not be purely market driven, but this helps in the overall national interest when you empower the socially, the economically backward people through reservations and subsidies and all such social welfare programs. Nationalism basically means nation first. So, like we have the Make in India program, all this helps the domestic market. The poor, the farmers, who are not invaded by the foreign players. So these are some positives of nationalism. Now let's talk about negatives. Now the negative side of nationalism is jingoism. That is when nationalism becomes extreme and you use violence to force and enforce your beliefs of nationalism on others. Like we have had many protests and violent acts in the name of banning Pakistani singers and Pakistani actors to perform and work in the Indian industry. So that is an example of jingoism. Then nationalism also leads to protectionism. You try to protect your domestic market and in turn you compromise with the efficiency of the people of the country and also of the Indian organization, be it railways or any other public government owned organization or company. You will find that they always run on loss because they care for the social welfare and that leads to huge loss and thus it reduces efficiency and nationalism. This emotional feeling cannot increase your GDP. Now let's move on to the conclusion part of our essay. Now here we need to give the solution for the negative aspects of both globalization and nationalism. So the major disadvantage or the major negative point for globalization was it kills the domestic market. So as a solution, you may suggest that we can have liberal laws and tax regulations for small and medium industries. You may have lower interest rate for loans. You may encourage startups to help the small and medium scale industries thrive in the competitive world. Also, you must encourage and fund innovation and research. When you fund innovation and research, even industries, farmer and every sector can gain from it. That is, they can have a competitive edge. This may also help the school students and the college students, the talented people. The problem of brain drain which we had discussed now, this will also encourage these students and we can absorb the talented students into innovation and research. So this was one way. And now talking about culture and heritage, that is westernization is ruining our own Indian culture. So the solution could be you could have different exhibitions, fairs. Then a major important step can be to revive our traditional things. Like for example, we have revived khadi now, handloom, then we have Banarsi, jute, Kolhapuris. All these forms of textile and clothing were very traditional and were not in use for a long time. But recently, when they were revived and contemporized, so that became a modern trend. So in this way, when we revive and modernize our traditional things, we can make it popular among the youth as well. The basic idea is globalize the positive things and not the negative things. Be it culture, be it things. So we need to have a balance. That is, we must always have our national interest first, but globalization can help in that national interest, and only then it is good. Globalization and nationalism are like the two wheels of a bicycle. They must move together for the perfect balance of a nation. And with time, we must keep evolving, just like Dr. Manmohan Singh said when he gave the 1991 reforms that no power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. So that is the main thing, and that is the main idea for this balance. So with this, we end our discussion on this essay topic, and on a practice section option, you can write your own essay using these points and also adding some of your own. So thank you for watching and keep practicing.